Starfield has lost all of its player base. Who could have predicted something like that for such an amazingly bad game?
So I've been seeing it with a fair amount of media talk in recent days regarding Starfield, about how the game has lost 97% of its players since the game's launch. And I recently saw another article over at Forbes from Paul Tassi, who blocked me for disagreeing with him and being snarky with him about it on social media, surrounding the game Palworld. It is the mindset that the eventual decline of a player base in a single-player game is a bad thing. And
no. I don't think that's the mindset. I don't necessarily think that's even the point. When people talk about Starfield, well, yeah, the fact that it's, one, a Bethesda game, and Bethesda games are supposed to be played for a really long time, that it can't even muster the numbers that, you know, something like Fallout New Vegas gets on an average is pathetic. The fact that it's already lower than something like Skyrim is pathetic. People don't really look at player drop-off that much unless the game is complete garbage and overrated. You know? Everyone understands that the drop-off is going to happen. The people only talk about the drop-off and how gigantic it is when we're talking about quality games like Redfall, Starfield, and whatnot. And people talk about the opposite, how good games are, and talk about their player numbers like Palworld because it's breaking records. You can directly tie how many people play the game from launch to whatever point X in the future with how good the game actually is. It has in fact a 100% direct correlation with everything that happens in the game.
Be perfectly honest, it's not. Well, at least not always. And from just the two games I've already mentioned, we have two entirely different case studies to examine in regards to that. Actually, we have 5 because I'm pulling in 3 more to look at: Baldur's Gate 3, Hogwarts Legacy, and Forspoken. And you'll see why in just a moment. So firstly, we have to consider why single-player games lose player numbers in such a short period of time. Well, it can usually be summed up in 3 different aspects. The first is that the game is just bad. So bad that no one will want to continue playing it. The second is that it was too good and people binged the game until there was no more content to be played. And the third can be summed up as a general lack of content. The game was good, but there wasn't much there. Now, you'll note there that
I would just sum it up to 2 things. 1, the game is bad and people stop playing it real fast. 2, people play the game and the majority of people stop playing a game once they finish the story, or they get tired of it from playing it.
the latter 2 reasons depend a lot on the game's replayability. But one obvious statement does need to be made because stating the obvious thing is obvious, obviously. Single-player games are not the same as online games, MMOs, games as a service, or live services. Single-player games in general have a set amount of content, whether that be a very large amount of content, such as we saw with Baldur's Gate 3, or it could be not so much, like in the case of Palworld. The only time you'll see more content with single-player games is if an expansion is made, such as we saw with The Witcher 3 and its expansions Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine. The single-player games have a definitive beginning, middle, and most importantly, end. They're mostly, but by no means always, a story-focused style of game, something to help keep the player engaged and also serves as a medium for delivering the created content to the player. There is the
Look at the Starfield gameplay, like what the hell are we even talking about here?
Aspect of replayability, which is a core factor, at least for me, whenever I evaluate a single-player game. Does it have replay value? Does the story, if there is...
That's a nice point. For me, it's pretty much never that, because I don't replay most games. It's kind of rare that I do. I kind of understand the idea of that, but some games are just unreplayable, and that's kind of fine, and some games are replayable, and that's also fine. Some games are specifically designed to be replayed, like Starfield, and Starfield fails at it because who would ever had the hell want to replay this stupid storyline again? That's just sad.
Does one warrant it? Do the gameplay mechanics lend themselves well to multiple playthroughs? Of course, there are a lot of ways to accomplish an increased amount of replayability. Perhaps the gameplay loop, grinding from beginning to top tier, is fun enough to keep people coming back for multiple playthroughs. Perhaps the story is engaging enough to make the player want to experience dialogue options and choices they hadn't chosen their previous time through. Maybe there's multiplayer that can enhance both of those options for the players. Perhaps there's modding support to create more content for the game for people to continue to enjoy. Hell, we all know how successful the modding scene has been for Bethesda for the past 2 decades or more. It's been the majority of their business model. That aspect and that avenue can never be discounted. But let's take a look at some of these games.
Is it though that well, if he means that Bethesda's business model is make a half-ass baked shitty game and allow modders to fix it while constantly impeding the effort of the modders, I guess he's right.
Games to see what is going on. Now, first, we have Starfield, a brand new IP released by Bethesda in early September of 2023.
IP.
And then we have this article by PC Games In, or PC Games In. Starfield has lost 97% of its Steam players in less than 6 months.
Good.
And I know I'm going to upset some people here, but Starfield falls into that category of being just not a good game. It's been extremely buggy and unstable. The story is about as uninteresting as one can get.
The story is not just uninteresting. The story is flat out bad and sad, okay? A 5-year-old writing this story could probably do better than that idiot who went on multiple Twitter rants defending how great of a writer he is and how everyone else is just too stupid to understand the greatness of this absolute shit show.
Culminating in the entire point of the story being a new game plus mode, which is not in any way delivered at all well. The gameplay itself is bad and the procedurally generated world...
Bruh, the new game plus mode, by the way, is a complete joke. Because it doesn't account at all for any situation where you say, people understand that you're something's wrong, that you're starborn, right? Then, new game plus is a joke. They literally did not rewrite a single line of dialogue to accommodate the fact that you're traveling in an alien ship. Everyone just blows it off as they're losing their mind or they're just hallucinating or some stupid shit like that. And when you tell everyone that you're starborn, whatever the hell that means, by the way, everyone's just like, yeah, makes sense. Checks out, Chief. Adios, amigos. Let's go. I believe you. Oh man, and then no dialogue options are accounted for anything further. Like people are still gonna talk to you, like it's the first playthrough. It's just the new game plus is a joke.
Worlds are copy-pasted emptiness. Bethesda developers claimed that having all those planets gives the player a sense of wonder, like a child looking up into the night sky and thinking about how many other worlds are out there.
Bro, if Starfield is what's out there, then, space is kind of fucking disappointing.
But that sense of wonder is not conveyed to the player at all. So, ignoring the conversation most Bethesda fans have about modders trying to ride to the rescue on a white stallion of hope, whereas most prominent modders have already thrown in the towel with Starfield, we have to focus on the game itself, which, from an objective standpoint, is not a game that can be considered to be of a high standard or quality. And so, players have since abandoned the game. The game itself reached a peak of nearly 331,000 players on Steam, with now less than 15,000.
The biggest Bethesda launch ever, keep in mind. Yeah. I mean, Bethesda is so done as a company.
1,000 concurrent players within the last 24 hours. Now, granted, most of those players likely did at least complete the story of Starfield, but there is where we come into the aspect of replayability. And Starfield simply doesn't have any. A person can only be bored.
Oh, it technically has a lot. It's just so bad no one wants to. The skill points are bad. Starting a new character is stupid. Restarting the game for New Game Plus and seeing Sarah as a potted plant is just dull and dumb. And yeah, that's pretty much all she wrote.
Bored with their purchase for so long before they give up on it. The game is simply not engaging, entertaining, or fun. Is it fun for some people? Oh, absolutely.
Well, for those people who Starfield is fun, you probably should go do an IQ test and get governmental assistance, because most likely you fucking qualify to be called a houseplant by definition. Okay? That's what happens when you like Starfield, and ironically. That's what happens when you say Starfield good. I have honestly more respect for the Xbox fans who want to defend Starfield just because it's an Xbox thing than the unironical people who say Starfield is a good game because it's a good game. Jesus Christ. Okay? No, actually, he's not gonna save you, probably. He's gonna lead you down to hell because that's where you belong if you think something like Starfield is good. Dude, I lasted 4 hours in this absolute shit show. Worst starting, worst dialogues, worst roleplay, worst skill options. Bro, there were situations where I magically just noticed, oh right, I have leveled up 4 times because levels in this game suck.
Yeah, I'm certain of it. At least 1,490 people. But for the vast majority of the rest, no, it most certainly is not. Also, it is worth noting that the player levels settled down to that level by mid to late December, so within 3 months, not 6 as has been reported by the media. There's simply nothing there to keep the player interested in continuing. Now let's take another example, a more positive one, Baldur's Gate 3. A blowout success by Larian Games that had been in early access for quite a long time, but went into a full release in early August of 2023. On Steam, the game had an all-time peak of a little over 875,000 people, and within the last 24 hours, the peak number of concurrent players was just shy of 187,000. That means...
Oh, I didn't even know that this part happened here. Nice.
That even Baldur's Gate 3, a game that is touted as being phenomenal by many, yours truly included, with a fantastic story, a metric ton of content, and a story that lends itself to multiple playthroughs, has still seen a player drop-off of roughly 79% on Steam in 7 months.
Well, 79% drop-off is completely different from a 97% drop-off. I mean, what's the argument here? 97% of people leaving Starfield is not bad, or I don't get it. What exactly is that supposed to mean?
Months. So bear that in mind. Even with a game that is a massive success like Baldur's Gate 3, and nearly 80% of the people are done with the game. But for both...
Yeah, it makes sense that a lot of people would be done with the game, considering it has been literal months. But again, it's not even comparable.
Even with a game. But for both of these titles, at least 6 months' time has elapsed since their release. Try as you might, it is rare for people to continue playing a single-player title after half a year. Whether the game is good, like Baldur's Gate 3, or the game is bad, like with Starfield, in either case, there simply isn't enough content for either game to maintain players that long after launch.
I don't know about that, Chief. I don't know if people are going to agree with the idea that Baldur's Gate doesn't have enough content to entertain people for literally 6+ months.
Now let's look at Forspoken, a game that everyone knew was going to be bad, so very few people even bought it, let alone played it. It was released in late January of 2000.
God, this character is literally the embodiment of the word cringe.
2023, so a full year has gone by since that game's release, where it saw an all-time peak number of concurrent players that didn't even break 13,000.
Look at this graph, boys.
Not even 100.
Look at this graph. Ouch. Damn, boy. All-time peak, 12K, well, 30K, let's say. And then it's almost a 50% drop. Here, jeez.
100 people are playing that game. On July 2nd, the peak day for players of that game in July, it had 397. That is, ironically, the same 97% drop-off that we were seeing with Starfield within that 6 months from launch time.
Okay, so the argument is bad games. Everyone knows the outcome of this, right? Everyone understands.
Window. And again, Forspoken was and is an absolutely horrendous game in every measurable respect. But 6 months to a year later, the few people that even knew the game existed had already moved on. However, for Forspoken, that drop for them occurred within a single month, not 6, not 3. Going back to the end of February and into March, the game never had more than 400 people playing at the same time. Again, Forspoken saw itself drop down to those levels in a little over a single...
Yeah. That's why we look at things in percentiles, technically, right? Well, actually, it's not the same, but yeah, you get the point. Like, bad games drop off. The difference here in reality is Forspoken doesn't have any crazy fanboys. Starfield does. Starfield has what is called the Bethesda fanboys. And they're gonna shill, they're gonna lie, they're gonna do everything they can to make anything Bethesda be, seem like it's made of gold. And they will unironically play Starfield. Like, come on. How many of you do not remember the classic yet fantastic, oh, you have to be a new game +5 and play 40 hours in, and that's when the real game starts. Bruh, all this absolute omega cope about the idea that you need to rush the new game plus because that's when the game gets good, and all of that garbage. Bruh, what do you even mean? What are you even talking about? You need to rush the new game plus for a game to be good, then the game's just bad.
Than 400 people playing at the same time. Again, Forspoken saw itself drop down to those levels in a little over a single calendar month. Whereas for Starfield, it still had a sharp decline after the first 30 days, but its decline has been a great deal more gradual. In Baldur's Gate 3, more gradual.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Again, you need to take into account the Starfield fanboys, and I think we can easily take into account the Starfield fanboys. The fanboys are roughly as many as the people who instantaneously, when the first thing they did, the Starfield, not the Starfield fanboys, but the Bethesda fanboys, when Starfield came out, the first thing they did, they gave it a 5-star review, thumbs up, and everything they could. You look at the positive feedback that it got on day one instantaneously, and those are the hardcore Starfield fanboys and Bethesda fanboys. And, well, you expect them to be longer because their whole life revolves around something as pathetic as Starfield. So you expect them to stay longer.
Still, but with a bit of a surge in January to reclaim some numbers. And what about Hogwarts Legacy, the best-selling game of 2023?
True.
Well, it released on February 10th, 2023. Saw an all-time peak of just shy of 880,000 concurrent players on Steam, with now a year later, the game holds on to a little over 24,000 concurrent players within the last 24 hours.
Yeah. This is completely fine. Hogwarts Legacy is not a game that you're supposed to play forever. Hogwarts Legacy is a literal game that you play for 3 days and never touch again in your life. It's a great game, and there are still people actively playing it. There are still people even making actively YouTube videos about it, but it has no replayability. So, it comes out, it's hyped, people play it, and it dies off. There you go. Not really that complicated, honestly, right?
That places Hogwarts Legacy at a drop of about 97% after one calendar year. Now, Hogwarts Legacy
makes sense.
Is not a bad game at all. It's rather good, if a bit formulaic. But that game reached its current numbers within 3 months, just like we saw with Starfield. And then we have...
Yeah, again, but there's a difference. Starfield is supposed to be played forever. Hogwarts Legacy is supposed to be played for 3 days and then you never play it again. Exactly like I said. So these are... I mean, the graphs are exactly the same, honestly, right? But the idea behind them is not the same at all.
Of Palworld and early...
Now, admittedly, there is some mod supporting for Hogwarts Legacy, but it's minor. And it's not the main attraction of the game at all.
Access title that saw an all-time high of over 2 million people just a little over 2 weeks ago now has a 24-hour peak of 610,000. A meteoric rise and a meteoric fall, one might say. But as with everything, there
not even close.
There is ever more to the story. Now, first of all, we're not talking big budgets here with Palworld, at least not at its release. The Starfield had a budget of $200 million, which it went over to the tune of roughly having a development cost of $400 million. Hogwarts Legacy, $150 million. Forspoken and Baldur's Gate 3 both had a development cost of $100 million. Palworld? Palworld's development cost at the time they launched was 1 billion yen, or roughly $6.7 million. a fraction of the budget of any of the previous games mentioned. And also the game is early access, meaning the game also has a fraction of the content that it would have had it waited for full release. Granted, the developers never in their wildest dreams thought Palworld would become such an overnight sensation, but with that, you can pretty safely expect that sort of meteoric drop as well, because the game isn't finished. There's very little in regards to story and very little in terms of replayability. Now, either way, each of these 5 single-player games, 2 of them with multiplayer elements being Baldur's Gate 3 and Palworld, each have seen a large amount of drop-off of their games, and each for a very different reason. Now, you can look at games like Starfield and Forspoken and simply say that their player base died because they're just bad games to begin with.
Yes, that's exactly what happened, obviously.
But to do that, you almost miss the forest for the trees. Because regardless of if a single-player game is good or if a single-player game is bad, there are only 2 ways to keep a player base around with a single-player game long-term. Some might say one of those reasons is a gameplay loop that can maintain that, but no, that would be incorrect. The only real reason a game will maintain its player base no matter where the game, whether it be single-player, MMO, game-as-a-service, live service, subscription model, what have you, is new content. For non-single-player games, that can either come in the
Okay, so Starfield's still bad because it has modding, and modding's not saving it?
form of new content being released by the developers, new content being released by modders, or new content in the form of emergent storytelling due to the multiplayer nature of the title.
Yeah, I think I'm done. Anyway, that was Sid Alpha. It is what it is. Starfield bad at the end of the day. Who would have expected? Anyway, this was Quizzer Sid. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.